My hands trembled as I stared at the family group text demanding I pay my brother's mortgage again. 28 years old, and they still expected me to fund his lifestyle while he played video games in the basement. But this time felt different. This time, I noticed something in the background of his latest vacation photos that made my blood run cold. Something that would shatter everything I believed about family loyalty and reveal the devastating truth about where my money had really been going all these years. Hey, everyone! Before we dive into this wild family revenge story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how I discovered my family's shocking betrayal and got the sweetest revenge imaginable, smash that like button and hit subscribe because this story has more twists than a pretzel factory. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when I finally fight back. My name is Serafina, and for the past 6 years, I had been the family's personal ATM. Every month, like clockwork, my parents would call with another sob story about my younger brother Marcus needing help. Rent money, car repairs, medical bills, grocery money, the requests never stopped. And like the dutiful daughter I was raised to be, I always said yes. I worked 60-hour weeks as a software engineer, living in a modest apartment while pouring my savings into what I thought was keeping my family afloat. My own dreams of homeownership, travel, and financial security took a back seat to Marcus's endless emergencies. My parents painted him as struggling, barely making ends meet as he searched for his passion and bounced between part-time jobs. But that sunny Tuesday morning changed everything. I was scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break when Marcus posted a series of photos from what appeared to be an expensive ski resort in Aspen. Designer ski gear, champagne dinners, a luxury hotel room with a mountain view that probably cost more per night than my monthly rent. My stomach dropped as I zoomed in on the background of one photo. There, clearly visible through the hotel room window, was a distinctive blue Lamborghini parked in the valet area. The same car I had seen him post about months earlier, claiming it belonged to a rich friend who let him borrow it occasionally. But now I could see the personalized license plate Marcus 28. Not exactly a borrowed vehicle. My mind raced as I started connecting dots I had deliberately ignored before. The expensive watches he wore during our family video calls, always explaining them as gifts or work bonuses. The fact that he never seemed particularly stressed about money despite supposedly being broke. The way my parents always seemed to know exactly how much to ask for down to the penny. That evening, I called my parents with my usual monthly check-in. As expected, they had another request ready. Marcus needed $3,000 for a dental emergency that his insurance would not cover. But this time, I pressed for details. Which dentist? What procedure could I pay the office directly instead of transferring money? My mother's voice grew sharp with irritation. Serafina, honey, we don't have time for all these questions. Marcus is in pain and the dentist needs payment up front. You've never made things difficult before. The guilt trip was perfectly executed, refined through years of practice. But for the first time, I felt angry instead of ashamed. I'll need to see the dental estimate first, I said firmly. Just have Marcus send me the paperwork. The line went quiet for a long moment. Then my father's voice carefully controlled. That's really not necessary, sweetheart. We're family. Since when do you not trust us? Since I saw my supposedly broke brother living it up in Aspen while I ate ramen noodles and postponed my own medical appointments to save money, I thought. But instead, I said, I just want to make sure everything's handled properly. Businesslike, you know. They eventually agreed, but the paperwork never came. When I called back 3 days later, my mother claimed Marcus had found another way to handle the dental issue. No details, no explanation. Just a vague assurance that everything was fine. That weekend, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. I told myself I just wanted to check on everyone, but really I was looking for answers. My parents seemed nervous when I arrived, exchanging glances I had never noticed before. Marcus was not there, supposedly working a weekend shift at his restaurant job. While my mother prepared lunch, I excused myself to use the bathroom and took a detour through the house I had grown up in. Everything looked normal until I reached my father's home office. The door was partially open and I could see multiple financial documents spread across his desk. Before I could stop myself, I stepped inside for a closer look. What I found made my knees weak. Bank statements showing massive deposits from an account I did not recognize. Investment portfolios worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Property deeds for 3 rental properties I had never heard them mention. And most damning of all, a handwritten ledger tracking payments from S, clearly me, alongside notations about M's allowance and vacation fund. They were not struggling. They were not helping Marcus with genuine emergencies. They were running a systematic fraud operation with me as the unknowing victim, funneling my hard-earned money into their investment portfolio while maintaining the fiction of family crisis after family crisis. My hands shook as I photographed everything with my phone, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it downstairs. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. For 6 years, I had been financing their comfortable retirement and my brother's lavish lifestyle while believing I was being a good daughter and sister. The worst part was not the money, though. Losing over $200,000 certainly stung. It was the betrayal of trust, the manipulation of my love and sense of family obligation. Every guilt trip, every emotional appeal, every time they made me feel selfish for questioning their requests, it had all been calculated deception. I returned to the kitchen on unsteady legs, forcing myself to act normal through lunch while my mind raced with plans. They chatted about mundane topics, my mother complaining about grocery prices, while I mentally calculated how those grocery money transfers had probably funded their recent cruise to Alaska. When I finally left that afternoon, they seemed relieved to see me go. My mother hugged me extra tight, probably thinking she had successfully navigated whatever suspicion had brought me there. If only she knew that their comfortable little scam was about to implode in spectacular fashion. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by printed copies of the photographs, planning my next move. The naive, people-pleasing daughter they had taken advantage of for years was gone. In her place was someone much more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to gain from watching their carefully constructed lies crumble. The next 2 weeks were the most carefully planned period of my life. I transformed from emotional victim to strategic mastermind, documenting everything with the precision of a forensic accountant. Every bank transfer, every sob story, every manipulation tactic got cataloged and cross-referenced. I was building a case that would be absolutely bulletproof. First, I hired a private investigator named Janet Morrison, a no-nonsense former police detective who specialized in financial fraud cases. Within 72 hours, she had uncovered the full scope of their operation. Marcus was not just living large on my dime. He was operating a side business flipping luxury cars funded entirely by the money I thought was going to his basic survival needs. The rental properties were even more infuriating. My parents had used my emergency payments as down payments for investment real estate, then rented the properties out for pure profit. They were literally using my money to build wealth while keeping me poor and stressed about family obligations. But the piece de resistance came when Janet discovered something that made everything else pale in comparison. Marcus had been bragging online about his investment strategy in various forums, detailing how he had convinced his investor sister to fund his lifestyle while he built his business empire. He had turned my exploitation into a success story he was proud to share with strangers. Armed with this intelligence, I crafted my revenge strategy. It needed to be public, devastating, and completely impossible to deny or spin. I decided to strike during our family's biggest annual event, my parents' wedding anniversary party, scheduled for the following Saturday. They had invited 60 people to celebrate 40 years of marriage, including all our extended family friends, and my father's business associates. It would be the perfect audience for some long overdue truth-telling. I RSVP'd with enthusiasm, even offering to help with the preparations. My sudden helpfulness surprised them, but they were too focused on party planning to question my motives. I volunteered to create a slideshow presentation about their marriage journey, which they thought was a wonderfully sentimental gesture. Oh, it was going to be sentimental, all right. I spent the week creating 2 presentations. The first was exactly what they expected, a heartwarming collection of family photos and milestone moments from their 4 decades together. The second was my masterpiece, a detailed financial breakdown of their 6-year fraud operation, complete with bank records, Marcus's online bragging posts, and a calculation of exactly how much they had stolen from me. I also prepared printed packets for each guest containing copies of all the evidence, along with a letter explaining how my family had manipulated my love and trust to fund their secret wealth-building scheme. Every document was notarized and legally verified to prevent any claims of fabrication. The party was held at their country club, a venue choice that suddenly made more sense given what I now knew about their actual financial situation. I arrived early, ostensibly, to help set up the audio-visual equipment for my presentation. What they did not know was that I was also setting up multiple cameras to record their reactions and ensure I had proof of everything that was about to unfold. As guests arrived, I played the perfect daughter role one final time. I hugged relatives, chatted with family friends, and accepted compliments about what a devoted daughter I was for organizing such a beautiful tribute to my parents. The irony was almost unbearable. Marcus arrived fashionably late, wearing a watch that probably cost more than my car. He had the audacity to complain to me about being totally broke again and hint about needing help with his electric bill. I smiled and told him not to worry about money anymore, that everything was about to change for our whole family. When it came time for the presentation, my father gave a touching speech about family being the most important thing in life, about how proud he was of his children, and how family should always stick together through thick and thin. The guests applauded warmly. My mother wiped away tears of joy. I stood up with my laptop, connecting it to the large screen they had rented for the occasion. "Thank you so much for those beautiful words, Dad. Family really is everything, which is why I wanted to share something very special with everyone here tonight. A story about family loyalty, sacrifice, and the true meaning of love." I clicked to the first slide of my real presentation. It was titled, "The True Cost of Family, How My Parents and Brother Stole $200,000 from Me While I Thought I Was Helping Them Survive." The room went silent. My father's face drained of color. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "6 years ago," I continued in a calm, clear voice, "my parents told me my brother was struggling financially and needed family support. Being a loving daughter and sister, I agreed to help with emergency expenses. What I didn't know was that I was actually funding their secret investment portfolio and my brother's luxury lifestyle." I clicked through slide after slide of evidence. Bank records showing the money trail. Screenshots of Marcus bragging about his scam online. Photos of the rental properties purchased with my money. Documentation of their actual net worth versus the poverty story they had sold me. The guests sat in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record, others whispering in shock. Several of my father's business associates looked particularly uncomfortable, probably recognizing the legal implications of what they were witnessing. Marcus tried to interrupt, standing up and claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but I had prepared for that too. I played an audio recording from one of our recent phone calls where he explicitly detailed needing money for rent while simultaneously posting about his expensive vacation plans on social media. The most painful part, I said, advancing to my final slides, was not the money itself, but the realization that my family saw me as nothing more than an ATM machine. Every emotional manipulation, every guilt trip, every time you made me feel selfish for having my own financial goals, it was all calculated to keep the money flowing. I ended with a slide showing my bank account balance nearly empty after 6 years of family emergencies, next to their combined assets over $800,000 in cash investments and properties. So tonight, we're celebrating more than just 40 years of marriage. We're celebrating the end of 40 years of lies. The packets being distributed to each of you contain copies of all this evidence because I believe everyone should know exactly who they're really celebrating tonight. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents sat frozen, unable to deny what everyone had just witnessed. Marcus had actually fled the room during my presentation, probably realizing his luxury lifestyle was about to become very public knowledge. The aftermath of the anniversary party revelation created an earthquake that rippled through our entire extended family and social circle. Within hours of the presentation, my phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages from relatives, family, friends, and even some of my parents' business associates who wanted to hear more details about what they had witnessed. But the most surprising response came from someone I had barely spoken to in years, my cousin Diana, my father's niece who lived across the country in Portland. She called me at 6 in the morning the day after the party, her voice shaking with what sounded like a mixture of anger and relief. "Serafina, I need to tell you something," she said without preamble. "What you exposed last night, it's not the first time they've done this. They've been running the same scam on me for 3 years." My stomach dropped. I had assumed I was their only victim, but apparently my parents were even more calculating than I had realized. Diana explained that they had approached her shortly after her divorce settlement claiming Marcus needed help with medical bills and student loan payments. She had been sending them $1,500 a month, believing she was helping family during a difficult time. "I never questioned it because they always had such detailed stories," she said. "Marcus's supposed surgery, your dad's fake back problems, your mom's imaginary prescription costs that insurance wouldn't cover. They had an answer for everything." As we talked, Diana revealed something even more disturbing. She had mentioned their financial struggles to other family members over the years, and several of them had also been approached for help. We started making calls together, reaching out to cousins, aunts, uncles, and family friends to see how deep this fraud network really went. The results were staggering. My parents had been running similar operations on at least 8 different people, tailoring their sob stories to each victim's specific circumstances and emotional vulnerabilities. Diana's divorce made her susceptible to stories about family stability. Our cousin Robert, who had recently inherited money, got approached about investment opportunities with Marcus. Aunt Helen, who had always felt guilty about living comfortably in retirement, was told touching stories about young people struggling in today's economy. Each victim had been kept isolated, believing they were the only one helping and sworn to secrecy to protect Marcus's pride. It was psychological manipulation on a massive scale, exploiting the natural human desire to help family members in need. By the end of the week, we had identified 9 victims who had collectively transferred over $600,000 to my parents and Marcus over the past 8 years. $600,000 stolen through emotional blackmail and fabricated emergencies. Diana suggested we form a support group to share experiences and plan our response strategy. We met virtually every evening, comparing notes and building a comprehensive timeline of their fraud operations. The group dynamics were fascinating to observe. We had all been isolated and ashamed, believing we were enabling rather than helping. But together, we found strength and validation. The most valuable member of our alliance turned out to be Uncle Ray, my father's younger brother who worked as an attorney specializing in elder abuse and financial crimes. When he heard about the scope of the fraud, he was horrified but also professionally intrigued. He offered to represent all of us pro bono in both civil and criminal proceedings against my parents and Marcus. "This isn't just family drama," he explained during one of our group calls. "This is systematic fraud money laundering and conspiracy. The fact that they targeted multiple family members using coordinated lies makes it a criminal enterprise under federal law." Uncle Ray began building a legal case while our support group focused on gathering additional evidence. We discovered that Marcus had been using multiple social media accounts under different names to coordinate his stories and keep track of which lies he had told to which victims. Screenshot by screenshot, we built an irrefutable timeline of deception. The turning point came when Diana's teenage daughter Emma, who had always been tech-savvy, offered to help with digital forensics. Within a day, she had recovered deleted social media posts, cached web pages, and even some encrypted messages between Marcus and my parents discussing their fundraising strategy for different family members. Emma's discoveries were absolutely damning. We found messages where they laughed about their victims' gullibility, referred to us as cash cows, and even rated different family members based on how much money they thought they could extract from each person. I was apparently their golden goose because of my steady income and guilty conscience about family obligations. Reading those messages was like being punched in the stomach repeatedly. They had not just stolen our money, they had actively mocked our love and concern for them. Every moment of worry I had felt about their supposed struggles, every sacrifice I had made to help them through difficult times, every sleepless night wondering if I was doing enough for family, it had all been entertainment for them. But the discovery that hurt most came from a message thread between my parents discussing my character. My mother had written, "Serafina is so desperate to be the good daughter that she'll believe anything. We could probably tell her Marcus needs money for dragon surgery and she'd find a way to pay for it." My father's response, the guilt complex we gave her as a child, really paid off long term. They had not just exploited my generosity, they had deliberately cultivated my sense of family obligation from childhood specifically to make me easier to manipulate as an adult. The psychological abuse went back decades, not just years. Our alliance grew stronger as we processed these revelations together. Diana started a private blog to document our experiences, which helped other family members understand the full scope of what had happened. Uncle Ray filed preliminary legal motions to freeze my parents' assets and prevent them from accessing the rental properties purchased with stolen money. Emma continued her digital investigations, uncovering new evidence almost daily. The most unexpected ally joined our group in the third week, Mrs. Patterson, our elderly family friend, who had apparently been targeted for smaller amounts over several years. She had worked as a bookkeeper for 40 years before retirement and had maintained meticulous records of every transaction. Her documentation helped us trace exactly how the stolen money had moved through various accounts and investments. Mrs. Patterson also provided crucial insight into my parents' psychology. She had noticed inconsistencies in their stories years ago, but had kept quiet to avoid family drama. "Your parents always needed to be seen as successful," she observed during one of our calls. "I think they started the fraud to maintain their image, then it became addictive when they realized how easy it was. As our evidence file grew thicker, our resolve grew stronger. We were no longer just individual victims seeking justice. We had become a coordinated force working toward complete exposure of their criminal enterprise. Every family gathering they had hosted, every holiday where they had played the role of struggling but proud parents, every moment where they had made us feel selfish for wanting our own financial security. It had all been an elaborate performance designed to keep the money flowing. But we also knew that our alliance faced a critical test ahead. My parents had not remained passive during our investigation. They were clearly aware that their world was closing in, and desperate people often make desperate choices. Uncle Ray warned us that they might try to divide our group by offering partial restitution to some victims, or attempt to discredit our evidence by claiming family dynamics had been misunderstood. We needed to stay united and focused on our ultimate goal: complete justice and full restitution for everyone they had victimized. The alliance that had started as a support group was about to become something much more powerful. A family revolution that would expose decades of manipulation and ensure that my parents and Marcus finally faced real consequences for their choices. The battle was just beginning, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was fighting with an army instead of standing alone. 3 weeks into our coordinated investigation, when everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place, I received a phone call that shattered my faith in our alliance. It was 9:30 on a Thursday evening when my phone rang with Diana's number, but the voice on the other end was not hers. "Serafina, this is Marcus." My blood ran cold. "I think you and I need to have a conversation about this little revenge fantasy you've got going." "How did you get Diana's phone?" I demanded, my heart racing. "She's right here next to me, actually." We've been having a very interesting discussion about family loyalty and forgiveness. Turns out Diana values family relationships more than money, unlike some people. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Diana, who had been our most passionate advocate for justice, who had shared her own pain and anger with such raw honesty, had somehow been turned against our cause. But how was that even possible? "Put Diana on the phone," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Hi, Serafina." Diana's voice sounded strange hollow. "I've been thinking a lot about everything we've discovered, and I realized that destroying the family isn't going to bring our money back. Marcus has helped me understand that there might be a better way to handle this situation." I felt sick. "Diana, what are you talking about? They stole from all of us. They laughed about it. You read those messages yourself." "People say things when they're stressed that they don't really mean," she replied, sounding like she was reciting rehearsed lines. "Marcus explained that the family was going through some financial difficulties and they were embarrassed to ask for help directly. The money was always intended as loans, not gifts." It was complete nonsense, and the Diana I had spent weeks talking to would never have accepted such a weak explanation. Something was very wrong with this conversation, but I could not figure out what leverage they could possibly have over her. Marcus came back on the line. "Here's what's going to happen, sister. Diana is withdrawing from your little revenge club, and she's going to convince the others to do the same. In exchange, we're prepared to offer some compensation to everyone who's been affected by this misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated incredulously. "You documented everything yourselves. We have proof of systematic fraud spanning 8 years. What you have," Marcus said smoothly, "is a collection of private family communications taken out of context, combined with some unfortunate social media posts that could be interpreted in various ways. Any decent lawyer could tear your case apart in about 5 minutes." He was wrong about that. Uncle Ray had already confirmed our evidence was rock solid, but something about Marcus's confidence was deeply unsettling. Why was he so calm when his entire world should be collapsing around him? "Diana discovered something very interesting while she was digging through family records," Marcus continued. something that puts your own behavior in a very different light. Did you know that the money you've been sending us came from a trust fund your grandmother left specifically for family support? My stomach dropped. That was impossible. Grandma Rose had left me money in her will, but it was a straightforward inheritance, not a trust fund with conditions attached. I had documentation proving that. I don't know what lies you've told Diana, but check your email. Marcus interrupted. Diana just sent you some very interesting documents she found in Mom and Dad's safe. Turns out your inheritance was supposed to be distributed among the entire family, but you convinced Grandma Rose to give it all to you just before she died. We've been too polite to mention it all these years, but the truth is, you've been sitting on money that rightfully belongs to all of us. I hung up and immediately called Uncle Ray, my hands shaking as I scrolled through the email Diana had sent. The documents looked authentic. Official letterhead, proper legal language, notarized signatures. They appeared to show that my grandmother's will had been modified just weeks before her death, changing a family trust into a direct inheritance to me alone. Ray, I need you to look at something immediately, I said when he answered. Someone's claiming my inheritance was supposed to be a family trust and they have documentation. Send it over, he said. But Serafina, I reviewed your grandmother's original will when you inherited. There was never any mention of a trust or family distribution requirements. As I waited for Ray's analysis, more members of our alliance started calling with similar stories. Emma's mother had received a call suggesting that Emma's computer hacking activities were actually illegal and could result in serious criminal charges. Mrs. Patterson was told that her detailed financial records proved she had been aware of irregularities for years, making her potentially complicit in money laundering. One by one, our carefully built alliance was crumbling under pressure. Each member was being offered a combination of partial restitution and threats that made continuing the fight seem too risky or too costly. Diana was actively working to convince others that reconciliation was better than confrontation, using her position as a respected family member to undermine our cause. The psychological warfare was masterful. They had identified each person's specific vulnerabilities and crafted targeted pressure that played on our fears and guilt. They were using our own family bonds against us, suggesting that pursuing justice would destroy relationships that could never be repaired. By Friday afternoon, only Uncle Ray and I remained committed to the legal case. Everyone else had either been bought off with partial payments or scared off with threats of collateral consequences. Our mountain of evidence remained valid, but without the supporting testimony of other victims, the case would be much harder to prosecute successfully. I felt utterly defeated. Not only had my parents and Marcus stolen from me financially, but they had now managed to turn my own allies against me. The family members who had shared my outrage and supported my quest for justice had been systematically neutralized through a combination of manipulation and intimidation. But the worst part was Diana's betrayal. She had been my closest collaborator, the person who had given me strength when I felt overwhelmed by the scope of their fraud. Discovering that she could be so easily turned felt like losing a sister all over again. That evening, Uncle Ray called with his analysis of the forged documents. It's sophisticated work, he admitted, but there are several inconsistencies that prove they're fabricated. The problem is that your parents clearly have access to legal expertise and resources we didn't expect. This isn't just a family squabble anymore. They're fighting back with professional help. So we've lost, I said, exhaustion weighing down every word. Not necessarily, Ray replied. But we need to regroup and approach this differently. They've won this round by dividing and conquering, but that doesn't mean the war is over. Sometimes you have to lose a battle to win the campaign. I hung up feeling more alone than ever, but also strangely determined. If my family wanted to play dirty, if they thought they could manipulate and intimidate their way out of facing consequences, they had seriously underestimated my resolve. They had taken my money, my trust, and now my allies. But they had also revealed something crucial about themselves. They were willing to go to extraordinary lengths to avoid accountability. That desperation would eventually become their downfall. I just had to be patient and smart enough to outlast them. 2 weeks after the collapse of our family alliance, when I was beginning to think I might have to accept partial victory at best salvation, came from the most unexpected source imaginable. I was sitting in my apartment reviewing legal options with Uncle Ray over video call when my doorbell rang. Standing in my hallway was Emma Diana's teenage daughter holding a laptop bag and looking like she had been crying. But her eyes held a determination that reminded me of myself in those first days after discovering the truth. "I need to show you something," she said without preamble. "My mom made me promise not to contact you, but I can't stay quiet about what I found." She came inside and immediately pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who had clearly inherited the family's technical skills. After Mom started backing down from the case, I kept investigating on my own. I wanted to understand how they convinced her to give up so easily. What Emma showed me was absolutely devastating. She had managed to hack into Marcus's email accounts and discovered the real reason for Diana's sudden change of heart. My parents had not just offered her money or threatened her with legal consequences. They had found her Achilles' heel. Diana's ex-husband had been behind on child support for months, and she was facing potential financial hardship that could affect Emma's college plans. My parents had secretly paid off the entire debt, then presented Diana with a choice: abandon the case against them, or they would demand immediate repayment of the child support money, potentially forcing Diana into bankruptcy. "Mom didn't betray you because she stopped caring about justice," Emma explained, tears streaming down her face. "She betrayed you because she was trying to protect me." They knew exactly how to manipulate her maternal instincts. But that was not the most shocking discovery. Emma had also uncovered communications proving that my parents had been planning their manipulation strategy for weeks before I exposed them at the anniversary party. They had anticipated the possibility of family members banding together and had prepared detailed psychological profiles of each potential ally, identifying specific pressure points they could exploit if needed. "They have a whole file on you, too," Emma said, pulling up another document. "They call it Operation Serafina, and it goes back years. They've been studying your behavior patterns, your emotional triggers, your relationships with other family members. This wasn't just opportunistic fraud. It was a long-term psychological manipulation campaign." The file on me was chilling to read. They had documented my childhood insecurities, my people-pleasing tendencies, my fear of family disapproval. They knew exactly which buttons to push to keep me compliant and generous. They had even predicted that I would eventually discover their fraud and had prepared contingency plans for managing the fallout. But Emma had saved the most damaging evidence for last. Hidden in an encrypted folder labeled Insurance Policy were audio recordings of my parents and Marcus discussing their fraud operation in explicit detail. Not only did they admit to systematic theft, but they also revealed the existence of additional victims we had never identified, including elderly family friends who had been too embarrassed to admit they had been scammed. "There are at least 15 other people they've stolen from," Emma explained. "Some of them are really old and living on fixed incomes. They targeted people who were too proud or too isolated to compare stories with others." The recordings were absolutely damning. In one conversation, my mother laughed about how easy it was to exploit guilty rich people who wanted to feel good about helping family. In another, Marcus bragged about his ability to cry on command when asking for money, calling it his special talent for extracting sympathy dollars. Most horrifying was a recording where my father discussed the psychological techniques they used to maintain control over their victims. He had actually researched cult manipulation strategies and adapted them for financial exploitation within families. The level of premeditation and sophistication was far beyond anything I had imagined. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked Emma. "If your mother finds out, she could face serious consequences." "Because it's not right," she said simply. "My mom taught me to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. She's forgotten that lesson temporarily, but I haven't. Besides, I'm 18 now. I make my own choices about what's right and wrong." Emma's courage gave me renewed energy for the fight. Here was someone young enough to be idealistic about justice but smart enough to understand the real stakes involved. She had risked her relationship with her mother to bring me evidence that could finally end this nightmare. We immediately called Uncle Ray and shared the new recordings. His reaction was even stronger than I expected. "This changes everything," he said. "We're not just talking about civil fraud anymore. This is racketeering. The systematic targeting of vulnerable elderly people, the sophisticated psychological manipulation, the coordination between multiple perpetrators. This could be prosecuted under organized crime statutes." Ray explained that the new evidence eliminated any need for victim testimony from our compromised family allies. The recordings were self-authenticating and showed clear intent to commit fraud. More importantly, the revelation of elderly victims meant that state elder abuse prosecutors would become involved, bringing additional resources and legal tools to the case. Within 24 hours of Emma's revelation, Ray had contacted both the State Attorney General's office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Both agencies expressed immediate interest in the case, particularly given the sophisticated psychological manipulation tactics and the targeting of elderly victims. But the most satisfying development came when one of the FBI agents explained how thoroughly my parents and Marcus had incriminated themselves. By documenting their strategies and keeping detailed records of their fraud operations, they had essentially created a complete roadmap for prosecutors to follow. Most criminal cases require investigators to piece together evidence and infer intent, the agent explained. But your family has handed us a complete confession, detailed victim profiles, and a clear money trail. It's like they wrote their own indictment. Emma had given me something even more valuable than evidence, though. She had restored my faith in the possibility of justice and reminded me that doing the right thing was always worth the personal cost. Her mother might have been forced to abandon our cause, but Diana had raised a daughter who understood the importance of standing up to bullies, even when those bullies happened to be family members. As we prepared for the legal battles ahead, I realized that losing my original alliance had actually been a blessing in disguise. The family members who abandoned our cause had been vulnerable to manipulation precisely because they still hoped to maintain relationships with my parents. Emma and I had no such illusions. We were fighting for complete victory, not comfortable compromise. My parents had made a critical error in their psychological warfare strategy. They had assumed that everyone could be bought, threatened, or manipulated into submission. But they had not counted on the righteous anger of a teenager who refused to accept that family loyalty should protect criminals from consequences. Their carefully planned manipulation campaign was about to collide with the unstoppable force of someone who genuinely believed in justice. 6 months after Emma walked into my apartment with the evidence that would destroy my family's criminal empire, I sat in a federal courthouse watching my parents and Marcus being sentenced for their crimes. The prosecution had been swift and thorough, with multiple agencies working together to ensure that every aspect of their fraud operation faced appropriate consequences. Marcus received 8 years in federal prison for wire fraud, money laundering, and elder abuse. My father got 12 years for organizing and directing the criminal enterprise, while my mother received 10 years for her role as the primary emotional manipulator in their schemes. The judge specifically noted that their targeting of elderly and vulnerable family members demonstrated a callous disregard for human dignity that warranted the maximum sentences allowed under federal guidelines. But the criminal convictions were only part of their downfall. The civil restitution orders were even more devastating to their comfortable lifestyle. Every asset they had accumulated through fraud was seized and liquidated to compensate victims. The rental property's investment accounts, luxury vehicles, and even my mother's jewelry collection were sold to fund a victim compensation pool administered by the court. The total restitution amount exceeded $1.2 million when all victims were identified and their losses calculated. The FBI investigation had uncovered 17 additional victims beyond our original group, including several elderly neighbors who had been too embarrassed to admit they had been scammed by people they trusted. Emma and I had become unlikely best friends through the legal process, bonding over our shared commitment to seeing justice served regardless of family pressure. She testified at the sentencing hearing about the psychological impact of discovering that her extended family were criminal predators, and the judge was visibly moved by her courage in speaking truth to power. Diana eventually reconciled with both of us once the legal proceedings made it impossible to deny the scope of her parents' crimes. She apologized tearfully for her temporary abandonment of our cause, explaining how the threats to Emma's future had clouded her judgment. Emma forgave her mother immediately, but insisted that standing up to bullies would always be worth any personal cost. The most unexpected development was my growing relationship with Uncle Ray's family. His wife, Patricia, and their 2 adult children welcomed me into their circle with genuine warmth, creating the supportive family dynamic I had always craved but never experienced. They showed me what healthy family relationships looked like, ones based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than manipulation and exploitation. Patricia became the mother figure I had never really had, someone who offered advice without ulterior motives and support without strings attached. Ray's children, my cousins Jennifer and Michael, included me in their holiday celebrations and family traditions, giving me a sense of belonging I had thought was lost forever when my biological family revealed their true nature. We created new traditions together, including an annual gathering to celebrate our chosen family bonds. These celebrations were everything my childhood family events had never been. Genuine expressions of love and gratitude rather than opportunities for manipulation and control. The financial restitution allowed me to finally pursue dreams I had postponed for years while funding my family's fraud operation. I bought a beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood, enrolled in graduate school to pursue my master's degree, and started traveling to places I had always wanted to see but could never afford. More importantly, I learned to trust my instincts about people and relationships. The experience had taught me to recognize manipulation tactics and emotional exploitation skills that proved valuable in both personal and professional contexts. I became someone who could offer support to friends and colleagues without being taken advantage of, maintaining healthy boundaries while still being genuinely helpful. Emma thrived in college studying computer science and cybersecurity with plans to work in financial crime investigation. She often said that exposing our family's fraud had given her a sense of purpose and direction she might never have discovered otherwise. Her courage in standing up for justice despite family pressure had shaped her into someone committed to protecting vulnerable people from predators. Diana rebuilt her life with dignity and strength, using the restitution money to secure Emma's college education and establish her own small business. She became an advocate for other fraud victims, speaking at seminars about how financial predators exploit family relationships and emotional bonds to access their victims' resources. The broader family slowly healed from the revelation that some of our most trusted members had been criminals all along. Some relatives struggled to accept the truth and gradually drifted away from family gatherings, but others became closer as we bonded over our shared experience of betrayal and recovery. Mrs. Patterson, our elderly family friend who had been targeted in the fraud scheme, became a fierce advocate for elder abuse awareness. Despite being in her 80s, she traveled to conferences and community centers to speak about the warning signs of financial exploitation, helping countless other seniors protect themselves from similar schemes. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that my parents and Marcus had ultimately done me an enormous favor by revealing their true nature so completely. Had they been more subtle in their exploitation, I might have spent decades slowly being drained financially and emotionally without ever understanding what was happening. Their greed and arrogance led them to overplay their hand, creating the evidence trail that ensured their complete downfall. By documenting their strategies and boasting about their success, they had essentially written their own arrest warrants. The most satisfying aspect of their punishment was knowing that they would spend years in prison thinking about how their own hubris had destroyed them. They had been so confident in their ability to manipulate and control family members that they never considered the possibility of facing real consequences for their actions. As I finish telling this story, I want to ask all of you something important. Have you ever experienced family members who seemed to constantly need financial help but never quite got back on their feet? Have you noticed relatives living better than their supposed income should allow while still asking you for money? Trust your instincts if something feels wrong, because financial predators often start their operations within families where trust runs deep and questions seem disloyal. If this story resonated with your own experiences, or if you know someone who might be dealing with similar family manipulation, please share this video with them. Hit that like button if you believe justice should apply to everyone, even family members, and subscribe for more stories about people who refused to accept being victims and fought back against those who tried to exploit them. Thank you for listening to my story about how standing up for yourself can transform your entire life. Remember that choosing justice over comfort and truth over peace is always worth the temporary pain. Sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you inherit, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well while criminals face the consequences they earned through their own choices.